Today, are New Zealanders being kept in the dark? Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to the latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian and New Zealand perspective. And today I'm joined again by property expert Joe Wilkes. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Martin. How you doing?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Yeah, very well, very well. Thought we'd look at something different today, and just talk about I suppose general distractions that the mainstream media use to try and keep Kiwis in the dark, and also I suppose my concerns a little bit about how the press fed the bubble. Lots of articles about competition on houses, talking about the rental stress, talking about all the pressures that people are under, but I've gotten quite quiet on the changing situation in the market now. But yeah, just wanted to sort of cover off a few bits and pieces. Talk about banking. Talk about the bail-in legislation that I don't think New Zealanders are largely aware of, and talk about a few of the I suppose the microcosms of information that people I don't think are taking enough interest in.
Okay, it's certainly interesting how the media here and in Australia and in New Zealand are still very, very myopic and really don't seem to be recognising what's really going on. And we suspect that's not just a lack of interest, it's more about a specific agenda.
Yeah, well, I suppose we've discussed before. A lot of the media, they do survive on the payments made to them for advertising of financial products, personal loans, and debt financing, and also the housing market. So I don't blame anyone for wanting to sort of talk a story if their livelihoods depend on it. Everybody's got to put bread on the table. So, but I do think that sometimes it's quite myopic, quite one-eyed. There's been a few things that during the hyping of the bubble in the last couple of years, where this has been really pushed. Got to get into the housing market now. If you don't get in now, you'll never get in. You'll be 55 before you can own a home. A lot of the stories were very emotive. And what I was also surprised about is we do have open websites where the people who read these websites are asked to comment on these sites. And there's obviously a lot of people at home, probably the landlords sat on their bums in retirement with an investment property. They seem to have a lot of time to make comments that are very, very sproiky. Now, over the last few years, those comments have really permeated the pressure on young people to get into this housing market. And what I found quite interesting is that the change of scene that we've seen really since November. The quantum of property articles on things like stuff have dropped off. There's very, very little real data now. So the data was available when we're going up, and now that it's not going up, things have stopped. And what's also interesting is that many of these comment sections used to be able to vote on. So people were able to put a comment, and then the public would be voting on whether they liked them, whether they didn't like them. It was all a bit daft. But what was really noticeable was that last year, the comments seemed to change in the second half of last year to a far more bearish outlook on property, and those comments were starting because they were weighted towards the most popular would go towards the top of a comment stream, and the bearish comments started to rise up the list. So people were obviously seeing and getting a little bit more education. Now, what we're seeing with stuff recently is that they've switched off the voting. So there are comments going on, but far fewer of them. So they must be moderating a lot more what's being said, and some of them are bloody daft. But they must be moderating the comment streams a lot more, so that the negative sentiment aren't rising to the top. There's just a melee of to be fair, fairly blind and ignorant comments mostly. But I don't want to, if people like stuff, then I don't want to get in the way of that. But The other things that I think, and this is keeping people in the dark, we did a post yesterday that we released, and we had 8,000 people look at it. I found it really interesting because, we were talking about Remuera. I had a little look at, whether anyone had looked at it and whether there was any comments that were addressed to me about 9 o'clock last night. And I don't know if you spotted it, but there was a translation service on the advert for the YouTube post we put up. So I don't know whether the 9 or 10 people that downvoted it were the ones that got it translated from abroad, but it was quite interesting to see that come up. But we are keeping people in the dark. There's an article and another YouTube post of a speech done by the governor of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand that was taken on Friday. And while our post yesterday had 8,000 people look at it, his has only had 340 since Friday. This is the governor of the Bank of England, Bank of New Zealand, and he's more important than you and I for formulating policy. It's a really good speech, actually. A lot of talk about the background of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, talking about the Reserve Bank being a tree for growth and nurturing of New Zealand, which I found a little bit fluffy, but what was really interesting was the change in policy. So we touched on it last week. The Reserve Bank are changing to a committee-based policy, a decision-making committee now for rate decisions. Focus will be on maintaining inflation levels, which, again, we talked about last week, and we're not sure whether inflation measures are entirely accurate. But there's some really, really good stuff in that speech that only 340-something New Zealanders have watched, because I guess Married at First Sight has been far too important for them to miss.
Well, what we'll do is we'll put a cross-link to his YouTube speech, and perhaps we can get him a few more viewers.
That'd be good. It'd be good. I'd like people to watch it because it's quite a good speech. Now, talking about being kept in the dark, we touched on a while ago our concerns, I suppose, about bail-in legislation, which is still murky in Australia, but we're balls in New Zealand. If there is an issue with a bank, yes, depositor funds are on the line for being used to prevent a bank going under. We don't have a bank guarantee, so there's no deposit guarantee. And we are in bail-in, like much of the Western world is. Now, I thought I'd test out this, Martin, and I went and actually spoke to 5 banks a week ago last Monday. I went into all 5 of the major branches, so the 4 Australian banks, and 6 branches. I went into TSB, and I also went into Kiwi Bank. And I went into each operation, walked up to the shop counter under the premise that I was going to be opening some accounts for my children, that I was going to be depositing some money in their accounts. And I'd like for somebody to explain to me what open banking resolution was, and their thoughts on bail-in. Now, not a single person operating in these banks could tell me anything about bail-in. None of them. So we've got people who are taking customer deposits on the front line of the bank. So they're meeting the customers. Not one in 6 branches had a clue, excuse my French, about the bail-in legislation. I did get 3 phone calls back during the course of the day where people went and obviously went higher up within the businesses to go and find out what bail-in was. I actually saw one person in the office Google bail-in, and they came up with the bailing in, bailing out post that we did back in November. So, but that was the first time she'd ever seen anything about it. And this isn't one person. So in each branch, I didn't just talk to the cashier. The cashiers then asked all the other cashiers in the branches whether they knew anything about it. So these employees of our major banking institutions don't know what bail-in means to the people from whom they're taking deposits. One and this is not partisan, but the best response that I got from a phone call afterwards was from Kiwi Bank, and I spoke to the bank manager who hadn't been available when I've been in the branch. She had gone away and spoken to people within the business, and they were very, very fast at coming back to me and saying, well, look, the situation is that we do have an open banking resolution. If you are concerned about the banks, you need to go and have a look at the Reserve Bank dashboard, and there is an explanation on the Reserve Bank website. Now, if only 350 people had bothered to watch Governor Orr's speech last Friday, and none of these people in the banks have ever known, I'm not sure how many people are actually looking at the Reserve Bank website to find out the risks that these banks could play if we do see a property downturn that goes and carries on.
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing, but it's not astonishing. I mean, my experience is that often the frontline bank staff know very little about some of the more policy issues. But I'd have thought anybody who is responsible for talking to customers about opening, particularly deposit accounts, should have a basic understanding of what the open banking resolution scheme is in New Zealand, because it's fundamental in terms of the way that banking is now working there. So it's pretty astonishing that the people in more senior positions across the banks in New Zealand have not thought about how to communicate it down to their teams and in turn develop some material. I mean, there should be, I would have thought, a brochure saying what it is, what the risk may be, etc. I mean, it's not something. Stuff, right?
It's not something that would take too long. I mean, you could run it in a training session in half an hour and give people a reasonable overview of what the regulations are. My reason for doing was to talk about, and that was the subterfuge of talking about children's accounts. What I found also very astonishing was there are a couple of those banks, I'm not going to name them because they should watch this post and sort out their offering, who don't actually pay interest on children's accounts unless they go and sign up for a term deposit. So kids aren't being taught how to save money and actually get a bloody return on it. So children, if you're opening up accounts, you're opening up an account. You've got the risk of bail-in should something go wrong with the bank, and actually you're not going to earn any interest with a couple of them. So really do your homework, and everybody who's got accounts that they're running for their children, go back, speak to them, find out what the interest rates are, because these have been trickling down over the last couple of years, and there are now children's accounts. We're not educating our youth. I grew up in an environment where, in the 70s and 80s, it was a weekly event. You take your pocket money down to the bank, you put it in, and then at the end of the year, you get your statement, and they tell you three and six months interest. Well, actually, no, we were decimalised by the time I was growing up, but. If you put in the money into the bank and you're not getting anything other than risk, what's the point? For children to learn to save and to learn to manage their money, you want them to have access to it so that they build up that precedent of, okay, I'll save for something and then I'll buy it, but they may as well save it under the pillow.
Yeah, well, I've got this bee in my bonnet. I've had it in there for quite some time, that the fundamental problem we have with regard to finance is that there is not the right sort of education down to school level and around kids, right? So people actually have no feel for the value of money. They have no feel for things like interest rates and what it means, right? And they actually have very little understanding of what bank accounts are and how they work. And in fact, in Australia, some of the main activity with regard to the schools is actually centered around one of the big four. And when you look at it closely, it's more a marketing exercise for that bank.
Trap them while they're young.
Yeah, exactly right. Get them when they're young and they'll stay with us. Rather than what should be there, which is a much more objective curriculum around banking and how it works and how finance works. But these are so critical concepts. And here's what I also found, Joe, is that later when I survey households, who are older and should know, they don't know either because they've never learned. When you talk to them about annual percentage rate, you talk to them about, if you ask them, so what's the effective impact of an interest rate of that versus that. They've got no feel, no idea.
Yeah,
and
is your interest being paid? Is your interest being paid daily, weekly, monthly, annually? No, yeah. Well,
Correct.
I mean, my daughter, my oldest daughter, she does do financial literacy, they call it over here. I haven't been in a class. I might see if I can go and present to them about money creation. That could be interesting one.
And on bail-in.
Although to be fair, if I did it now, that might just terrify them about the future. They might not go to school the following day. They might say, "Sod it, we're off." But her classes, some of the things that she's come back to me so far. And I'm a big believer of you go and learn your stuff, and then you go and find out some other stuff as well. There has been an emphasis on the teaching of save money to get a deposit to buy a house as the investment vehicle. So it's very sort of, well, no, I don't know. Maybe ANZ have set the curriculum, so it could be very similar to what you're talking about. But yeah, it is quite myopic around one asset class, and it's not I don't see property generally as a productive asset class. They're productive sectors when people are building them, but flipping houses and swapping them for more money than last time is not productive.
Yeah, well, I have to say then that this whole concept of real estate only ever goes up, you never lose. You should be saving from a very early age for your first property. Those are the doctrines that are there. Unfortunately, that indoctrination looks as though it could be now rather falling foul of what's really happening.
Yeah, and the same applies to the KiwiSaver. I mean, KiwiSaver was established 10, 11 years ago for people to save for retirement, and many kids are coming into the workforce and they're setting up their KiwiSaver. They're getting to 32, 33, and they've got a few $1,000 set up in it. But that's now being stripped for the deposit for the house. So I think I mentioned in another post, I'm even coming across people who are in their 40s and 50s who are being encouraged to strip their retirement savings to fund the equity on a bigger mortgage or more mortgage, whatever else it might be. So we're just storing up headaches. We've talked about this in our last post, and just the number of people that 70% of people in this country don't have a mortgage, but half of those don't have a house either. We are storing up problems by this perpetual pushing of debt. The government haven't woken up yet to the fact that this is a credit issue. So please spread this message. If there's anyone in government, knock on the door. That's why Kiwi build houses aren't selling. I think they're up to 58 houses that they've been able to sell now. They're buying in existing developments because the developers can't sell them at the credit inflated land and building prices. 58 houses, large numbers of them now coming on stream as being completed. Can't find buyers for them. Housing shortage, bollocks.
And you might be amused, Joe. We spoke a couple of days ago, and we put the post up about these older people with a mortgage as they move towards retirement. Well, there was a 7:30 report last night on the ABC here in Australia highlighting that 46% of people over 55 in Australia still have a mortgage, and as they go into retirement, they won't have enough to be able to actually pay down and without stealing their superannuation. So I think we're ahead of the curve once again.
Good. Well, as long as someone's listening, someone's transmitting it. I did hear from a friend of mine. I haven't seen it, but I believe Duncan Garner, who does a morning show in New Zealand, reported on. I think it was a Bailey's auction last week, and this report was either Thursday morning, Friday morning. But the trouble is, it was at 6 o'clock in the morning when people are off to work or they're in bed still. And he was talking about how they'd been to an auction, or one of his people had been to an auction, 8 offers lot, full room of people to go and bid on the houses, no houses sold and no bids. So I haven't seen it. If I can find it, I'll send it to you. Maybe we can just attach that to the end of this post. But there are a few things trickling out, but they're obscure parts of the day, or they're Reserve Bank speeches that aren't being watched.
Well, at least those folks who are watching DFA will be ahead of the curve, because we're covering all the main issues, all the burning issues, and I think we remain ahead of the curve. So let's keep that going, Joe.
Will do, Martin.
All right, good to talk to you. Thanks.
All the best.
So there you have it. I think it's important to understand that many people just don't know what's really going on. So do follow the DFA channel. You'll get the best intelligence there is. Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.